Welcome back to our last week of East Asian International Management. We have several people that are active in sharing information. This is a Facebook file, Facebook groups, East Asian Management. Join this, talk to me. There's several different files. You should have your files shared here also. I see here that student Pia has her project. She's going to share the details there. Make sure you also know that farther down, here is I believe, an evaluation form. You can download, open this document. Make sure you not only evaluate the people presenting today and give details about how they can improve and what are some considerations they should think about for change, but continuing what I said at the beginning of the semester, I will give students special class awards you can put on your resume, and I want you guys to help me finalize the selection of these details. So Tuong or Hua, can one of you comment what this is? What are the topics?
So the award, right? Professor, can you hear me?
Yes, so the student award possibilities. Best presentation, I'm going to be giving to a student team or individual students.
Yeah.
And, best research project, there's first place, and then most proactive student. There's a variety of possible awards that we can give away. This is like a draft of what we're going to be giving away to some students. So I want you guys to take this form, fill out the yellow areas so you can nominate who you think should win an award. And at the top of this, make sure you write down the student's name that is presenting, give them a grade for some of the details, give them some comments for change or improvement, and then give that file directly to the teaching team, or if you're comfortable, you can share that also in the Facebook group. Make sure you leverage from each other. That's about it. Thanks, guys. I think it's now time for us to go ahead and welcome the group that's going to be talking about managing diversity at Samsung.
So I would like to start a presentation. I'm also talking through my phone, so I hope that the audio will be better. So we will be talking about managing cultural diversity at Samsung in Korea. So as a global operating company in the modern and increasingly digitized world, Samsung has many employees all around the world. Even though that they are producing products for a global audience, Samsung in Korea still has very few foreigners working for the company. And through literature research, as well as a self-conduct survey, we researched about the company's management of cultural diversity in recent years to provide a better understanding about the main challenges. Apart from many other things, we found that cultural misunderstandings are the main source of managerial difficulties, and created some concepts for a future change management that address the actual issue. Here is our agenda. There is topic introduction, methodology, literature research, as well as our findings, survey and its findings, and a conclusion. So topic introduction. As the world gets more and more connected, many companies are facing the challenges of having to manage people from different cultures within one team. There are also new trends such as home office or virtual teams. And it is easier than ever before to apply for a job in a different country. And now something a little bit about Samsung. So Samsung is one of the world's largest electronic companies and is part of the South Korean Samsung Group. And they have headquarters in Seoul. They operate in around 84 countries, and have 197 subsidiaries. According to the Samsung Electronic Sustainable Management Report 2021, the total number of employees in 2020 was around 268,000, with more than 100,000 workers that were employed in the headquarters in South Korea alone. Samsung actively promotes innovating and growth driven by an inclusive culture and a diverse workforce. And to achieve this, they aim to create a global team where everyone belongs and has equal opportunities. The topic introduction. So in 2020, Forbes awarded Samsung USA as the best employer for diversity. And in 2021, Samsung Electronics ranked first on the Forbes world's best employer list. Even though Samsung is globally very successful with their diversity strategy, there seemed to be very little cultural diversity at Samsung in Korea. And with Korea being the heart of the global operation, we think that it is very important to find out more about foreigner culture at Samsung Korea, and are using this research project to give an overview about recent cultural difficulties and opportunities within the company, as well as proposing some concepts for possible future change management. The methodology, so literature research. We conducted our literature research in the high quality research database that is called Scopus, and got over 10 valuable and recent articles that gave us important insights for our research. And our survey, we contacted over 60 people working for Samsung in Korea via both LinkedIn and Facebook. And even though that most of our efforts were ignored, we eventually managed to get 2 answers from foreigners currently and formerly employed at Samsung Korea. And both of them were men in their early 40s and 50s, and they wished to stay anonymous.
So now that we introduced the project and talked about our methodology, we are going to talk more about our findings. And we first focused on common cultural differences that are not only prone to Samsung, but are very popular or occur often in general. So common differences are often opinions, backgrounds, and identities, which sometimes lead to the fear of difference, which could fragment a team or lead to divisiveness. And most problems or most interactions intensified with the introduction of various nationalities, which just means that if more people from different cultures and backgrounds work together, there is the higher possibility of communication difficulties. Visible characteristics of cultural differences are, for example, race, ethnic heritage, education levels and statuses, and invisible characteristics would be religion, sexualities, and values, as well as attitudes and principles. Okay, so now that we... Oh, was someone trying to say something? Okay, so now that we learned about common differences, we focused more on cultural differences at Samsung. And we found one study that compared Samsung with other Western companies, and they found, or they especially emphasized the different social cultures, especially the values, the language, and most importantly, the social organization. So the hierarchy system was one thing they really pointed out to be very different. And another study that we found actually was very interesting for us because it described the situation a few years ago where Volvo Construction at that time still owned by Sweden. They acquisitioned some of Samsung's heavy industry division in Korea, and that meant huge changes for the employees in Korea. They said that they found positive that there was less overtime work and less meaningless paperwork. And the internal communication became much better. Problems were that the new policies were perceived as a serious threat because most of the employees felt like they had been overlooked and their previous work experience had become meaningless, as there were no more in-house training programs. And yeah, they were kind of afraid that they would now have to basically start from the beginning again. So what we found interesting was that Volvo basically saw this as a rational decision making, and the employees in Korea saw these changes as an oppressive excuse to exploit them. Another study suggested that Samsung in general, or the employees of Samsung in general, appreciate if they can get rid of hierarchies, and they like promotion regardless of seniority. Still, they said that obstacles of cross-cultural communication arise when employees feel that they're not being appreciated, which was pretty much the same as the other study suggested. So one example that they had was that the older workers basically expected the new employees to stay until the job is finished, regardless of the working hours, and the foreign employees didn't really understand that concept or saw that concept as something that was worth living by. So the cultural difference was definitely seen as disrespectful. Then we also focused on possible ways to manage these cultural differences. So we identified that you really need to find the nature and implications of the differences within a team to establish a framework and make a better understanding, or get the team to be more aware of the cultural differences. And another good step would be developing a high-performing team that's basically responsible for cultural differences and make sure everyone feels included. Managers should also learn to prioritize one value over another, basically depending on the situation. And creating a multicultural management would also really help, because it supports the thought of everyone is included. If you have a foreign manager, he might be able to understand other foreign workers better to avoid cultural traps. Another thing that was mentioned was also Hofstede's cultural dimensions. For example, lower power distance, high collectivism to really become one team. And the leadership style should be rearranged according to the situation. Then we also think that we should focus more on a shared company culture. So maybe less focusing on the individual cultures, but really strengthening what they share. So symbols, values, assumptions, they could do that through workshops, or maybe company clothes to feel like a unit. Then lastly, we found out that HR should overlook the entire cultural terrain. So that from the very beginning, they should really try to get involved and get everyone included. Lastly, with the findings, we also wanted to share what or how you can profit from cultural differences. And we found that empirical studies showed the high importance of and effects of diversity on an organization at the performance. Because if you work with a team of multicultural people, you can get more creative solutions, and everyone can basically bring their own insights from the similar markets. So you have more in-depth knowledge of the actual consumer habits or the target group. Also, we found that participant leadership would be beneficial, and entrepreneurial learning and openness were positively moderated by cultural differences. Okay, with that, I give over to Jesús.
Okay, hello everyone. So this is our summary of literature findings. So as you can see, we have differences in opinion, background, identity can lead to communication problems. And For example, cultural teams. Let's just say that Korean employees welcomed the reduction of hierarchies and paperwork, as well as the possibility of promotion regardless of seniority. And negative changes were presented in the form of new policies that disregarded the workers' old experience and made them feel exploited and disrespected and less appreciated. And the reasons for the negative feelings were communication problems, as the possibly good intentions behind these changes were not clearly explained to the Samsung workers. And so the ways to manage the cultural differences are firstly identify the nature and implications of national cultural differences and establishing a framework for understanding and awareness of high-performing team, and identify the best possible management style for your company and strengthen company's culture, for example, workshops. And before we move on to the survey findings, on the next, can you go to next slide? Yeah, so before we move on to the survey findings, I just want to ask the class if you have any questions about the articles or everything we've done so far. So if you guys have anything to ask, feel free to ask before we talk about the result of the survey.
Can you tell me, can you explain me one more time about the communication problems and ways to solve that problem?
Okay, Pia, can you go back?
Yeah. Wait. Maybe I can answer that while we talk. So the communication problems refer to the findings about the Volvo case that we saw, where the Swedish employees or employers had actually good intentions with the new policies, but since they did not clearly explain their reasons for the change or the reasons why they felt like there needed to be change, the Korean workers felt overlooked and exploited. So we think this is a clear communication problem that could have been avoided if there had been more talks between both groups or leaders of both groups. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention. So can you what was happening at Samsung, or what could they learn from Volvo's experience? What was happening there? What was the problem? What could they learn from that benchmark?
And the problem was basically that they, for example, we know that in Korea, you don't have to have a lot of working experience, but get basically trained within the company. There are company workshops, and Volvo didn't really understand that concept, or they didn't have that concept in Sweden. So they stopped having in-house workshops, or basically changed the way of working. So the Korean employees were really afraid of losing out on old experience, and also on they were basically afraid that they weren't be able to promote it anymore, or that they would lose out against the Swedish employees that came into the companies. So we think that could have been avoided if Volvo had taken the time to really ask the Korean employees about their opinions, and maybe also send someone from Sweden to Korea to clearly explain what would be beneficial with the new ways. So yeah, this is one point that we thought could have been done better.
My question was to respect that point, but in fine detail, maybe I'm too much of a geek. Since you're doing well, and I haven't seen a lot of other people planning to present today, I'm just going to get into detail. I encourage everyone in class, if you don't have big presentations for today, to ask lots of details. So about what we're saying right now, we're looking at a huge company that's managing itself around the world, but we're also looking at how it might learn from some other company. Great, that's a great thing. Benchmarking is always great. But one of the things we're learning in our class is that you must understand the cultural differences. And Sweden and Volvo culturally are basically the opposite of Korea. So you are saying there was an issue, and if it was more participative management, I believe is what you were saying, it would have been better. And an example you were saying was if the executives from this opposite country, Sweden, came and explained how everybody is supposed to be fair and everybody can grow on their own, so you don't need the training, which is the opposite of Korean culture. You're saying that may work better in the environment where information is centralized. People aren't used to getting information. They're used to only getting opportunities when their boss gives it to them, and then they just work hard. So my question is it possible that research paper that you're benchmarking, which is great, is it possible that paper was written by non-Koreans that viewed participative management as good and may not have fully understood how the failure might not have been to adopt more of the opposite culture? Maybe the failure to have a good interaction in Korea with Korean employees, is what I understood, is because they didn't understand that people here are used to centralization of information and information only coming in a certain area, like the end of year training. So was that research paper created by non-Koreans, number one, or more specifically, was it created by somebody from Scandinavia, number two, which is the opposite of what usually works in Korea?
Usually I would agree with your thought, but it was actually written by Koreans, but they did not take one clear side. So I think what I might have stated was maybe a bit too one-sided. So another possible point would probably to see, or as a Swedish company, to not only promote your own values at the new location that you're working at, but also take the other side, because you have to work in that country to more understand and maybe not push your values too much on this side. So the article was very neutral about that, and yeah, the thought about what could have been done better was included by me. So maybe that was my one-sided view.
You're from the Western participative management environment. You saw that and you promoted what you saw, that affiliation bias, that type of thing. Okay, great. That's the point. I'm wanting everyone here to not be a follower. I want everyone here to be a leader. I want everyone here to talk about any questions you have to develop your understanding so we can share details. I've already reviewed this. I've gone through quite a bit. I've modified some of the slides already. And I want the classmates, the audience, to also interact, to try to ask questions as soon as you hear them, if the presenters don't mind. Thank you for that.
Yes, no problem. Then I now give over again to Joseph.
Okay, so all right, so these are the results of the survey. So as Thomas said, and as you already know, we contacted several people. We tried to contact several people on LinkedIn and Facebook, but unfortunately we couldn't get responses from most people that we contacted. But there were actually 2 people who responded to our message on Facebook, but they wanted to stay as an anonymous, so we didn't mention their names. But we have, as you can see right here, we have 2 people, one from North America and the other one is from India. And we're going to call them interviewee A and interviewee B. So the one who's from North America is a man in his early 50s who worked in lower management at Samsung in Korea for about 6 years. During his time at Samsung, he managed a team of about 20 people, of which four of them were foreigners. So during the survey, he described that the work with different cultures positively influenced the group's performance, as they had a broader insight on the target groups, the European and American market, and could share their experience. And the other one, interviewee B, the one who is from India, again, he's a man, and he is in his 40s, who's still working at Samsung in Korea, but not in a management position. So he is one of the two foreigners in his department, and was hired as an IT specialist. And he stated that due to his position, he's mostly working on projects on his own, and thus he doesn't have any much experience with working in a multicultural group. But he still talked about several communication problems that occurred due to the language barrier. So as you can see, the first one was the former worker, but the second one is someone who's currently working for Samsung. And let's take a look at what they said. So we have perceived difference between Korean and foreign cultures. So they stated that things tend to be more hierarchical. There's less contact to other workers who are not part of your division. So the negative sides of that would be regrettable, because it's hard to get in contact with people. For example, people who speak different language. But the positive effect of that would be everything is clearly structured, and the job takes a much bigger role in the life of people. And they both said after work activities, they're not required to participate in that kind of activities after work. And we have perceived advantages and disadvantages of working in multicultural teams. So according to their ideas, to what they said, the advantages would be working in a multicultural team definitely helps to understand other perspectives. When problems occurred, they usually combined multiple ideas and try to include everyone's opinion. And the other advantage was working with people from multiple nationalities helps to understand different target groups. And they also talked about the disadvantages of working in a multicultural teams, for example, communication problems and tension due to the difference in working styles, and racism and prejudices. It is easy to get blamed for problems if you are an outsider of the group. And the next one we have.
Sorry, could I comment a little bit before you go on? Again, sorry.
Sure.
I'm going to jump on everything. I want everybody to get really involved. So if we go back to your previous slide.
Okay.
Yes, this one. In here, any comments about this? So we're talking about generally non-Koreans coming to Korea and then commenting about what are some differences. And I am helping this class trying to realize what you should be doing, should and should not be doing. This is saying that if you are not Korean and you're working in Korea, this says they're not required to participate in special activities. Any comments about that? Because I want to be careful. I think some people may think if you come from Germany or you come from Czech Republic or some other country and you're working here and you don't participate in special activities, that's okay. I want to analyze that. What are your comments so far?
Well, since we only summarized their answers, they basically talked about how different things were with the after work activities. but they said that they were invited to them, and but they felt like they were not required to participate them in comparison to maybe other Korean workers. So that's why I stated that here once again to really describe the difference.
Understand that.
Mm.
But if we take that exact same statement that you just said, there's your work that's in the contract, you have to do this, this, this. And then there's many other activities. And there's no written form that anybody has to go, including Koreans. So what you're saying here, legally on contracts, it's, I believe, the same for non-Koreans as Koreans. But what I see as the difference is non-Koreans know the unspoken rule, like the rule on the wall. Everybody just knows from the environment, or you know from your older people working there, or you know from your friends, even though it doesn't say you have to go, it doesn't say mandatory. In Korea, if you're Korean, you have to go or you're not going to be able to do well in the job. And I think non-Koreans don't know that. I think non-Koreans look at the contract. It says you have to do this. I do this. If nothing else says mandatory, I don't have to do it. So non-Koreans don't understand what local people learn from the environment as a requirement, even though it's not written. That's really confusing. So UNO, I believe you're part of this, right? Would you be able to comment? Are you in the group today?
Yeah, I'm with the group. Yeah. So comment on what you have just said.
Right. For example, you go to a company, you have friends at companies, and they get a contract that is probably the very similar contract that that somebody from Germany would get working in Korea. And it says you have to do A, you have to do work B, you have to do work C each year, period. But then if there is a end of year party, your contract does not say you have to go to the end of year company party. But is a Korean person that doesn't go to those type of events, if you don't go to the 회식, what's going to happen to you?
Maybe what I know so far by my superiors, by my alumni, or something like news or SNS, I think the company gets penalties, like disadvantage for in case of disadvantage, such as not getting a promotion, giving a promotion that the person should have received, or maybe changing the position of the person who missed the 회식 meeting by himself. So I think these are kind of disadvantage and what might have happened to him.
Right. So is that yes, sir, you're not Korean and you're studying this. Can you interpret what I was basically talking about and what I heard UNO say, but because UNO's communication style may be similar to mine living in Asia for a long time, can you try to directly say what UNO just said? Summarize directly. Do you have to go to these, do you have to participate in activities that are not in your contract if you're working in Korea?
Well, I guess what he said was, even though you're not supposed to go to that activity, it's on the contract. If you don't go there, maybe you're gonna have a hard time to get promoted because you don't show up in that activities. I
Right.
guess that's what he meant.
Absolutely. That's definitely what I meant. And so UNO was saying that he talked about the word penalties. And I just want to make sure, take this opportunity again, sorry to steal your light, trying to teach this idea. There's many people from outside a country coming to work with an organization from a different country or different culture. And many people from the advanced world or developed world or the Western world, they will just look at the contract and they will do what the contract says, usually no more. It says work 9 to 5, at 5:01, I go home. That's what many people may think. However, the contracts here are not going to say you have to work after 5 o'clock, after 5:01. And they're not going to say you have to go to the 회식, which means company party or company dinner or the end of year party. It doesn't say that in the contract. So several outsiders may think, okay, I don't need to go. But why? What's going to happen? Why is it not written in a contract? Number one, because these cultures are not focused on contracts. Traditionally, they didn't use contracts. Traditionally, they only focused on the relationship and the big picture. If the big picture changes, the agreement changes immediately and there's no problem. It changed because of the environment. But doing international business, they realize they have to have contracts. They have to put important things on writing. But a 회식, a company dinner or a company party, so far, people haven't identified that is a requirement. Why is it a requirement? Even though it's not in a contract yet? Because there's hundreds of thousands of people working there. Everyone is trying to do very well. A lot of people are trying to get promotions. If you are not active in where those promotional decisions are made, which is often outside the office, you're not going to be able to compete, number one, and some people will just push you out because you're threatening their opportunities. So I could be wrong, but I want to make sure people don't misunderstand this. So yes, non-Koreans or non-Chinese or non-Japanese, non-Vietnamese, you go to these countries and people will say, you're not required to participate, but you need to understand if you don't, you basically don't have a future with that firm unless you're absolutely vital and have something that other people don't have. People will push you out. You need to get into the family, and that's really hard to do. Hopefully that's kind of clear. Anybody want it? Can you please argue with me? Please tell me I'm wrong.
No, I thought this was very interesting because we will hear later more about this, but both actually stated that they wish to be more included through workshops and everything. So what you just stated, that most people are not aware that these are basically the team building activities. Yeah, I think it's very important to make sure everyone understands this, that it's not taking always part in, or not always taking place in the workspace, but afterwards. So it's really what we also saw in the survey.
Great, thank you. Sorry, please continue.
Okay. So they both said despite difficulties, they both emphasized that they enjoy working in the culture diverse teams and see it as a good chance for innovate outcome, but ultimately they care most about the actual people and a good working environment and less about ethnicity. So when we asked if they would describe Samsung Korea as a multicultural workforce, they both agreed that the company is still lacking in diversity. Many foreigners struggle with the obvious language barrier and find it hard to acquire a job in Korea. And that results more possibilities for English speakers, as well as integration courses in the orientation phase would be appreciated. And that's what they suggested for Samsung. And when we asked how is the culture diversity managed at Samsung, they answered by saying for example, the interviewee A described his managing style as supportive, but focused on the outcomes. He explained that he tried to consider each individual perspective and had weekly team meetings to make sure everyone was on the same page. And the interview B, on the other side, he described his manager as a strict and task-oriented. He couldn't recall any special consideration for the multicultural workforce since there were only 2 foreigners, but they both agreed that the management plays an important role, not only when it comes to make sure everyone feels welcomed in the team, but also to make sure to make use of the full potential a multicultural workforce can bring. Do you have any questions about that slide, or like the answers they have?
Can anybody else in the class maybe critically analyze those statements?
How about the members in the group 1, Ulupek, Jongho, and Javukia?
Yeah, I was looking at the survey findings, but I couldn't think of any idea yet. I will talk about it when I have any questions.
Okay, then let's move on to the next part then. Okay, so here are the summary of our survey findings. So both interviews agreed that there is currently very little to almost no cultural diversity at Samsung Korea. For example, they said there's no special focus on foreign workers. And even though both parties stated that they have enjoyed working at Samsung, they also called for more opportunities for foreign workers and hope
hello?
for better.
I think I have to do from now on.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Oh,
That
all
was
right.
my point.
So for talking about the survey finding, both interviewees agree that there is currently very little to almost no cultural diversity at the Samsung Korea. There is no special focus on the foreign workers as well. And even though both parties stated that they enjoy working at the company Samsung in Korea, they also requested more opportunities for foreign workers and hope better inclusion to the workplace. And also, advantage of multicultural teams were perceived as more creative solutions and the exchange of valuable know-how. However, the survey also showed that there are still prejudices and bias and communication issues that need to be taken care of in the future. What we learned was that the literature focused mostly on the view of the Korean employees at Samsung, who welcome cultural diversity due to less hierarchies and better promotion chances. On the other hand, the survey focused on the opposite side, namely foreign workers at Samsung Korea who were more concerned about the actual work environment and inclusion of the workforce. While comparing both sides, we found that it is very interesting how different both groups are perceiving this topic, which leads to the conclusion that the change management needs to focus on better communication within the within the whole workforces. The question for the class, how would you manage the presented issue about the opportunities?
Yeah, so maybe if you have any ideas to create better communication or get both sides to work closer together, we would be very interested in your opinions about that before we come to our conclusion.
I don't know about the culture, the working culture in Korea, but some the companies I mean I have been to, so like to be able to have all the employees communication better. So at the beginning of like every morning, so the company has a small talk, a meeting, like 15 or 30 minutes at the beginning. So that's also the time for all the managers and also the employees could discuss about the job, but also they could have a short time to to touch it and to exchange the difficulties or any ideas for the job during that day, or the next upcoming weeks or days, or something like that. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. That's definitely a good point. So to
Oh.
interact more with each other outside of work or inside of work, but outside of work topics. So that's...
Actually, it inside of the work environment,
Mhm.
that's a kind of a requirement for all the employees at the beginning. So they have to go to the companies early, and the meeting starts at the time. So everybody must be on time. And I realized that through the presentation, it seems like the Samsung Korea has it's in minus and the small number of the workers. I mean the foreign workers. So maybe getting more employees from the other countries. So that also have to build up the cultural diversity at the Samsung Korea.
Thank you.
If I could add to your question here, questions of the class, how would you manage this information? What I'm going to point out a few things, and then I would like the class participants to take my points and argue them or talk about them. So I see here that people inside the company, they welcome an idea, but it seems the reality of the idea is not done. That's what I see here. People want to be global. They welcome diversity, but they're not doing it. Is that, for example, with Black Lives Matter, white people, for example, want the world to be fair, and so they say they're fair to everyone. But if you actually argue earlier, even though they say they want to be fair, are they? Let's go back to this. So that's just one point. And if we go back to the earlier slide, on the earlier slide, you were saying that.
One second, my computer isn't working with me.
The survey also showed that there is still communication issues or prejudices that need to be taken care of. Sorry for messing up your presentation. It's your blue survey. I can read it to you since I remember some of the details. What it was saying is that the interviewers agreed that there's no cultural diversity and there's no focus on foreigners. Yes, as we see here, if there's no cultural diversity and no focus on it, isn't that what they're saying in New York City? Isn't that what they're saying in Washington, D.C.? Where was George Floyd's problem? Isn't that what people in that community say? They want to be global. That's what they said before these new words. These are completely new words to the planet, basically. And people think in that environment that there's no special focus on Black people. And so people have died because they were Black. And so what if we apply that to Samsung? What if we apply it, forget Samsung, to just any company in China or Japan or Vietnam or Korea? They think, I want to be global. My mind, I'm open to people from Nigeria or Botswana or any country in the world, but you don't look to include them in your decision-making details, even when you're trying to sell there. Is that an issue? And then that idea of the communication issues. You say that some people say, surveys show there are communication issues. So how are you going to manage that? What does it entail when you're talking about communication issues? How do people communicate in Germany? How do people communicate in Canada, in Scandinavia, especially where Volvo is? Information is out there for anybody to use. It's completely decentralized. So anybody can ask anybody for any information. But in Korea, children are, unfortunately, let's not even say Korea, let's say some countries, Vietnam, China, Japan, Korea, some kids are smacked if they ask a question in a class. So they're not told not to ask questions. It's just considered as kind of disrespectful sometimes, maybe in the older generation. So there aren't rules saying you're not allowed to ask questions. There aren't rules and contracts saying you don't have to go to the company party. There aren't questions saying, there aren't contracts saying you're allowed or you should not ask the CEO to explain a contract that he's promoting, but locally you know it. How can the Black people, how can the minority people, how can the outside people learn that if it's not written and it's not communicated? It just comes from the environment. Edward Hall talks about high context versus low context culture. Most people think it's not really important. But with work, it could mean your survival or you're fired. If you don't know what people are chit-chatting about, and if you only follow that written word, you cannot thrive. Any comments about that? Can you break that apart?
Maybe, for example, with the Black Lives Matter, one thing why they got so popular and so famous was because they were speaking out and really getting the focus on them. So I think if we compare that to the foreign workers at Samsung, maybe if they are not seen by their managers, they should promote themselves as, hey, we are from a different culture and we want to learn to become more part of your group. But then if we compare it again to Black Lives Matter, it also worked with social pressure, I think. So yeah, I think Korea or Asia or all countries in general have to understand that there are multiple cultures around the world and that they need to be included more. So I think they are slowly opening and changing, but it takes time and effort to do so.
Okay, well, let's forget about the average, right? We're teaching what is the best thing to do. And so, I'm going to give you guys great marks, but I want you to criticize and check everything. Did I just hear somebody say that, yeah, maybe the contract doesn't say you must attend this party and maybe you should promote yourself to blah, 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 blah. That alone, isn't that non-Asian? Do Asian people promote themselves? Aren't they usually saying the company is great, my boss is great? Even if I did all of the work, a lot of people in Asia give the work to their boss to get more powerful, and there's no contract, but they understand if the boss gets powerful from 100% work I did, that boss is going to pull me up with him. Versus in Silicon Valley, if I don't promote myself, somebody else is going to take that and I'm going to die. So the average US idea is I have to promote myself. But through many parts of Asia, that's considered bad. So even our solution,
Yes.
somebody help me finish.
Well, I think it's, since they are planning to become more diverse, it would be a first step to break down these old silent traditions. So I think
You're telling
even foreign workers, yeah.
if I tell you, if you're from Germany, forget everything German. Can you do it?
No, and of course not immediately, but I think if you are focused on the long run on an international company, and you really, because Samsung is really trying to promote the diversity aspect, I think in the long run, they of course shouldn't change anything, but should listen to a few changes. And the only way to do that is to speak up and not maybe aggressively say everything you do is wrong, but just say, hey, I would appreciate if you could include me more.
When was the last time you heard students say that in the university president's meeting? Never, almost never. When was the last time you heard new recruits at Samsung say that to their bosses? I believe almost never. So your idea of participative, speak up, that is a Western value. So it seems that you have to consider being that insider and somehow getting the inside local value to accept it rather than changing it from outside. It's really hard to do. Why should we care? Right now, Pia, I thank you. It's awesome. You're arguing with me, debating with me. But should anybody else care? What is the gig economy? Why do you all have to know about the gig economy? You're studying about East Asian management because you want to do international work. But in this area, especially Japan, people were attracted because of lifelong employment that does not continue to thrive. It is very quickly being replaced by gig jobs. That means the companies are hiring people to do jobs based off of just doing that project. And so if you as a German, if you as a Brazilian or from wherever want to work with Samsung, just doing your job, the contract and finishing, you will not thrive. You need to do more. You need to invest in yourself to understand that local country culture that you're trying to get in probably will not easily accept you, just like Black Lives Matter. A lot of millions of Black people are saying, I want to be included, but I can't. The system is broken. Rich people are white because white people for hundreds of years owned all of the land. And the taxes are set up so taxes are generally given to poor people, which may be Black people. So the whole system, Black people are poor, they're taxed, so they can't get richer. The rich people are generally white, so they're going to keep getting richer because they own the land and they don't have these taxes and things. So they're saying the system is broken. When you try to work as an outsider in a new job, whether it's a gig job, a short-term job, a freelancing job online or not, you need to not just look at the local company culture simply. You need to invest a lot of time to try to understand how is it different, and then understand, like this Black Lives Matter thing, a lot of North American white people, maybe myself included several years ago, I thought I wasn't prejudiced. There was no problem. I'm just going to keep doing things and not bother Black people and then I'm a good boy. But if I keep doing things and accept the tax system or accept the land ownership system that for hundreds of years cheated the outsider, that also is not fair because the system has changed. So for you to thrive as a freelancer, start understanding the impact of this. It gets pretty deep. Maybe it's too deep. So I'll be quiet. Anyway, thank you very much for talking about this. Please continue.
Yeah, we have one last slide, maybe. No, wants to continue our conclusion.
The conclusions also is about refrain mindset, about recognizing the value of diversity within a team, build awareness through workshops, realizing the importance of diversity inclusion from a business perspective, practice inclusion by providing team building events, developing diverse and inclusive relationship to lead change. Consider inclusion on all levels, leader level guide for team leaders to cultivate an inclusive culture through diversity. For personal level, learning about oneself and others. For team level, develop diverse and inclusive relationship and make sure nobody feels excluded. So thank you for listening. And here are the yeah, this is the end of my presentation, our presentation.
I do have questions regarding survey. So did you conduct the survey with the non-Koreans only, or non-Koreans and Koreans as well?
No, we tried very hard to reach people, but we only reached foreigners. But it would have been, of course, super interesting to see both perspectives. We at least saw the perspective from the literature side, but yeah, in general, it was kind of one-sided. That's definitely a flaw of the research.
Actually, I'd like to point out a good thing. As outsiders trying to do research, you're outside the company trying to get information. Because the hierarchy is the norm, you're not in the hierarchy, they're not going to share with you. And another rule, information is usually just protected and given to the top people. It's not shared with other people. That means it's very hard for you to get that information. Another thing, that whole idea of loyalty is a cultural characteristic here, and you are an outsider. So again, that's a third strike against us, that you're not going to get information easily if you just go in unprepared. And so thank you for doing that. One thing you did, which was very good, is you started trying to get information from many people, and you found that you couldn't really get information from Koreans inside a company because of those three things we just said. And the people that didn't understand the environment and how you have to protect the group, you have to protect information, you're not allowed to talk to outsiders. Those unwritten rules are not known by the outsiders, the foreigners, so those foreigners were able to cooperate with you. That's one thing. And another thing is, legally, if you say that you're unhappy with a company and a company has a problem, you could go to jail in Korea. So many foreigners don't know even the laws, national laws, defamation laws. So what you did well that you don't even realize is you started trying to review many different people for a broad census, and then you realized that you had to do a case study rather than just survey everyone. So you did a case study. You found a few cases, and then you asked several questions to those cases. So you did a case study. Number two, you also did a survey that was very significant. It's just you didn't know it. Your literature review. You should never just say, I did a literature review. All that means is I read books. Well, you didn't just read books. You surveyed the best of the best books. You surveyed very specific books. You checked for just the Scopus books So mention that. If you say that you surveyed the Scopus publications for a certain keyword, that alone is a very valuable research tool. If you say that you surveyed the Scopus books from 1990 to 2021, that is even more. That's very, very reliable and very specific surveying right there. You don't need to do any other surveying. So you did two very good sources of research and surveying. So thank you for that. Just be very specific. And hopefully everybody understands we're pointing out things that we are seeing. For example, we should care about Black Lives Matter. We should care about cultural differences. We should care, like Volvo is famous around the planet for being one of the best companies in the world. And yet it's not that great anymore because they were bought by somebody else. And now Volvo is not Swedish. Volvo is Chinese. So understand the importance of the small details. It will take a lot of time just to check into it. And the more you talk about it, the better. However, in Asia, in Korea, maybe you need to talk about it when you're drunk with somebody else. How can you do that if you're online?
For first one, so I think some students also need to go to the next class.
We are finished. So I was just trying to make sure you guys are aware of those points. Please share your files in Facebook. Please start connecting with other people, evaluating these other files in Facebook. And I will see you guys next class for the very last class we have. Thanks, guys. Very good job.
Have a nice
Thank you
day,
so much.
Have a nice
everyone.
day.
Thank you, Professor.
You too.